This is a continuation of A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway, comprising chapters 5 through 7. Chapter 5. The next afternoon I went to call on Miss Barkley again. She was not in the garden, and I went to the side door of the villa where the ambulances drove up. Inside, I saw the head nurse, who said Miss Barkley was on duty. "There's a war on, you know." I said I knew. "You're the American in the Italian army?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "How did you happen to do that? Why didn't you join up with us?" "I don't know," I said. "Could I join now?" "I'm afraid not now. Tell me. Why did you join up with the Italians?" "I was in Italy," I said, "and I spoke Italian." "Oh," she said, "I'm learning it. It's a beautiful language." "Somebody said you should be able to learn it in 2 weeks." "Oh, I'll not learn it in 2 weeks. I've studied it for months now. You may come and see her after 7 o'clock if you wish. She'll be off then. But don't bring a lot of Italians." "Not even for the beautiful language?" "No, nor for the beautiful uniforms." "Good evening," I said. "Arrivederci, tenente." "Arrivederla." I saluted and went out. It was impossible to salute foreigners as an Italian without embarrassment. The Italian salute never seemed made for export. The day had been hot. I had been up the river to the bridgehead at Plava. It was there that the offensive was to begin. It had been impossible to advance on the far side the year before, because there was only one road leading down from the pass to the pontoon bridge, and it was under machine gun and shell fire for nearly a mile. It was not wide enough either to carry all the transport for an offensive, and the Austrians could make a shambles out of it. But the Italians had crossed and spread out a little way on the far side to hold about 1.5 miles on the Austrian side of the river. It was a nasty place, and the Austrians should not have let them hold it. I suppose it was mutual tolerance because the Austrians still kept a bridgehead further down the river. The Austrian trenches were above on the hillside, only a few yards from the Italian lines. There had been a little town, but it was all rubble. There was what was left of a railway station and a smashed permanent bridge that could not be repaired and used because it was in plain sight. I went along the narrow road down toward the river, left the car at the dressing station under the hill, crossed the pontoon bridge, which was protected by a shoulder of the mountain, and went through the trenches in the smashed downtown and along the edge of the slope. Everybody was in the dugouts. There were racks of rockets standing to be touched off to call for help from the artillery, or to signal with if the telephone wires were cut. It was quiet, hot, and dirty. I looked across the wire at the Austrian lines. Nobody was in sight. I had a drink with a captain that I knew in one of the dugouts and went back across the bridge. A new wide road was being finished that would go over the mountain and zigzag down to the bridge. When this road was finished, the offensive would start. It came down through the forest in sharp turns. The system was to bring everything down the new road and take the empty trucks, carts, and loaded ambulances, and all returning traffic up the old narrow road. The dressing station was on the Austrian side of the river, under the edge of the hill, and stretcher bearers would bring the wounded back across the pontoon bridge. It would be the same when the offensive started. As far as I could make out, the last mile or so of the new road where it started to level out would be able to be shelled steadily by the Austrians. It looked as though it might be a mess, but I found a place where the cars would be sheltered after they had passed that last bad-looking bit, and could wait for the wounded to be brought across the pontoon bridge. I would have liked to drive over the new road, but it was not yet finished. It looked wide and well made with a good grade, and the turns looked very impressive where you could see them through openings in the forest on the mountainside. The cars would be all right with their good metal-to-metal brakes, and anyway, coming down, they would not be loaded. I drove back up the narrow road. 2 carabinieri held the car up. A shell had fallen, and while we waited, 3 others fell up the road. They were 77s and came with a wishing rush of air, a hard bright burst and flash, and then gray smoke that blew across the road. The carabinieri waved us to go on. Passing where the shells had landed, I avoided the small broken places and smelled the high explosive and the smell of blasted clay and stone and freshly shattered flint. I drove back to Gorizia and our villa and, as I said, went to call on Miss Barkley, who was on duty. At dinner, I ate very quickly and left for the villa where the British had their hospital. It was really very large and beautiful, and there were fine trees in the grounds. Miss Barkley was sitting on a bench in the garden. Miss Ferguson was with her. They seemed glad to see me, and in a little while Miss Ferguson excused herself and went away. "I'll leave you two," she said. "You get along very well without me." "Don't go, Helen. Miss Barkley said. I'd really rather. I must write some letters. Good night, I said. Good night, Mr. Henry. Don't write anything that will bother the censor. Don't worry. I only write about what a beautiful place we live in and how brave the Italians are. That way, you'll be decorated. That will be nice. Good night, Catherine. I'll see you in a little while, Miss Barkley said. Miss Ferguson walked away in the dark. She's nice, I said. Oh, yes, she's very nice. She's a nurse. Aren't you a nurse? Oh, no, I'm something called a V, A.D. We work very hard, but no one trusts us. Why not? They don't trust us when there's nothing going on. When there is really work, they trust us. What is the difference? A nurse is like a doctor. It takes a long time to be. A V, A.D. is a shortcut. I see. The Italians didn't want women so near the front, so we're all on very special behavior. We don't go out. I can come here, though. Oh, yes, we're not cloistered. Let's drop the war. It's very hard. There's no place to drop it. Let's drop it anyway. All right. We looked at each other in the dark. I thought she was very beautiful, and I took her hand. She let me take it, and I held it and put my arm around under her arm. No, she said. I kept my arm where it was. Why not? No. Yes, I said. Please. I leaned forward in the dark to kiss her, and there was a sharp, stinging flash. She had slapped my face hard. Her hand had hit my nose and eyes, and tears came in my eyes from the reflex. I'm so sorry, she said. I felt I had a certain advantage. You were quite right. I'm dreadfully sorry, she said. I just couldn't stand the nurse's evening off aspect of it. I didn't mean to hurt you. I did hurt you, didn't I? She was looking at me in the dark. I was angry and yet certain, seeing it all ahead like the moves in a chess game. You did exactly right, I said. I don't mind at all. Poor man. You see, I've been leading a sort of a funny life, and I never even talk English. And then you're so very beautiful. I looked at her. You don't need to say a lot of nonsense. I said I was sorry. We do get along. Yes, I said, and we have gotten away from the war. She laughed. It was the first time I had ever heard her laugh. I watched her face. You are sweet, she said. No, I'm not. Yes, you are a dear. I'd be glad to kiss you if you don't mind. I looked in her eyes and put my arm around her as I had before and kissed her. I kissed her hard and held her tight and tried to open her lips. They were closed tight. I was still angry, and as I held her suddenly, she shivered. I held her close against me and could feel her heart beating, and her lips opened and her head went back against my hand, and then she was crying on my shoulder. Oh, darling, she said, you will be good to me, won't you? What the hell, I thought. I stroked her hair and patted her shoulder. She was crying. You will, won't you? She looked up at me. Because we're going to have a strange life. After a while, I walked with her to the door of the villa, and she went in, and I walked home. Back at the villa, I went upstairs to the room. Rinaldi was lying on his bed. He looked at me. So you make progress with Miss Barkley? We are friends. You have that pleasant air of a dog in heat. I did not understand the word. Of a what? He explained. You, I said, have that pleasant air of a dog who... Stop it, he said. In a little while we would say insulting things. He laughed. Good night, I said. Good night, little puppy. I knocked over his candle with the pillow and got into bed in the dark. Rinaldi picked up the candle, lit it, and went on reading. Chapter 6. I was away for 2 days at the posts. When I got home, it was too late, and I did not see Miss Barkley until the next evening. She was not in the garden, and I had to wait in the office of the hospital until she came down. There were many marble busts on painted wooden pillars along the walls of the room they used for an office. The hall, too, that the office opened on, was lined with them. They had the complete marble quality of all looking alike. Sculpture had always seemed a dull business. Still, bronzes looked like something. But marble busts all looked like a cemetery. There was one fine cemetery, though, the one at Pisa. Genoa was the place to see the bad marbles. This had been the villa of a very wealthy German, and the busts must have cost him plenty. I wondered who had done them and how much he got. I tried to make out whether they were members of the family or what. But they were all uniformly classical. You could not tell anything about them. I sat on a chair and held my cap. We were supposed to wear steel helmets even in Gorizia, but they were uncomfortable and too bloody theatrical in a town where the civilian inhabitants had not been evacuated. I wore one when we went up to the posts and carried an English gas mask. We were just beginning to get some of them. They were a real mask. Also, we were required to wear an automatic pistol, even doctors and sanitary officers. I felt it against the back of the chair. You were liable to arrest if you did not have one worn in plain sight. Rinaldi carried a holster stuffed with toilet paper. I wore a real one and felt like a gunman until I practiced firing it. It was an Astra 7.65 caliber with a short barrel, and it jumped so sharply when you let it off that there was no question of hitting anything. I practiced with it, holding below the target and trying to master the jerk of the ridiculous short barrel until I could hit within a yard of where I aimed at 20 paces. And then the ridiculousness of carrying a pistol at all came over me, and I soon forgot it and carried it flopping against the small of my back with no feeling at all, except a vague sort of shame when I met English-speaking people. I sat now in the chair, and an orderly of some sort looked at me disapprovingly from behind a desk, while I looked at the marble floor, the pillars with the marble busts, and the frescoes on the wall, and waited for Miss Barkley. The frescoes were not bad. Any frescoes were good when they started to peel and flake off. I saw Catherine Barkley coming down the hall and stood up. She did not seem tall walking toward me, but she looked very lovely. "Good evening, Mr. Henry," she said. "How do you do?" I said. The orderly was listening behind the desk. "Shall we sit here or go out in the garden?" "Let's go out. It's much cooler." I walked behind her out into the garden, the orderly looking after us. When we were out on the gravel drive, she said, "Where have you been?" "I've been out on post." "You couldn't have sent me a note?" "No," I said. "Not very well. I thought I was coming back." "You ought to have let me know, darling." We were off the driveway, walking under the trees. I took her hands, then stopped and kissed her. "Isn't there anywhere we can go?" "No," she said. "We have to just walk here. You've been away a long time." "This is the third day, but I'm back now." She looked at me. "And you do love me?" "Yes." "You did say you loved me, didn't you?" "Yes," I lied. "I love you." I had not said it before. "And you call me Catherine?" "Catherine." We walked on away, and were stopped under a tree. "Say, I've come back to Catherine in the night. I've come back to Catherine in the night. Oh, darling, you have come back, haven't you?" "Yes." "I love you so, and it's been awful. You won't go away?" "No, I'll always come back." "Oh, I love you so. Please put your hand there again." "It's not been away." I turned her so I could see her face when I kissed her, and I saw that her eyes were shut. I kissed both her shut eyes. I thought she was probably a little crazy. It was all right if she was. I did not care what I was getting into. This was better than going every evening to the house for officers where the girls climbed all over you and put your cap on backward as a sign of affection, between their trips upstairs with brother officers. I knew I did not love Catherine Barkley, nor had any idea of loving her. This was a game, like bridge, in which you said things instead of playing cards. Like bridge, you had to pretend you were playing for money or playing for some stakes. Nobody had mentioned what the stakes were. It was all right with me. "I wish there was some place we could go," I said. I was experiencing the masculine difficulty of making love very long standing up. "There isn't any place," she said. She came back from wherever she had been. "We might sit there just for a little while." We sat on the flat stone bench, and I held Catherine Barkley's hand. She would not let me put my arm around her. "Are you very tired?" she asked. "No." She looked down at the grass. "This is a rotten game we play, isn't it?" "What game?" "Don't be dull." "I'm not, on purpose." "You're a nice boy," she said, "and you play it as well as you know how, but it's a rotten game." "Do you always know what people think?" "Not always, but I do with you. You don't have to pretend you love me. That's over for the evening. Is there anything you'd like to talk about?" "But I do love you. Please let's not lie when we don't have to. I had a very fine little show, and I'm all right now. You see, I'm not mad, and I'm not gone off. It's only a little sometimes." I pressed her hand. "Dear Catherine." "It sounds very funny now, Catherine. You don't pronounce it very much alike, but you're very nice. You're a very good boy." "That's what the priest said." "Yes, you're very good, and you will come and see me." "Of course. And you don't have to say you love me. That's all over for a while." She stood up and put out her hand. "Good night." I wanted to kiss her. No, she said. I'm awfully tired. Kiss me, though, I said. I'm awfully tired, darling. Kiss me. Do you want to very much? Yes. We kissed and she broke away suddenly. No, good night, please, darling. We walked to the door and I saw her go in and down the hall. I liked to watch her move. She went on down the hall. I went on home. It was a hot night and there was a good deal going on up in the mountains. I watched the flashes on San Gabriele. I stopped in front of the Villa Rosa. The shutters were up, but it was still going on inside. Somebody was singing. I went on home. Rinaldi came in while I was undressing. Ah, ha, he said. It does not go so well. Baby is puzzled. Where have you been? At the Villa Rosa. It was very edifying, baby. We all sang, Where have you been? Calling on the British. Thank God I did not become involved with the British. Chapter 7. I came back the next afternoon from our first mountain post and stopped the car at the Smistimento, where the wounded and sick were sorted by their papers and the papers marked for the different hospitals. I had been driving and I sat in the car and the driver took the papers in. It was a hot day and the sky was very bright and blue and the road was white and dusty. I sat in the high seat of the Fiat and thought about nothing. A regiment went by in the road and I watched them pass. The men were hot and sweating. Some wore their steel helmets, but most of them carried them slung from their packs. Most of the helmets were too big and came down almost over the ears of the men who wore them. The officers all wore helmets, better-fitting helmets. It was half of the Brigata Basilicata. I identified them by their red and white striped collar mark. There were stragglers going by, long after the regiment had passed, men who could not keep up with their platoons. They were sweaty, dusty, and tired. Some looked pretty bad. A soldier came along after the last of the stragglers. He was walking with a limp. He stopped and sat down beside the road. I got down and went over. What's the matter? He looked at me, then stood up. I'm going on. What's the trouble? The war. What's wrong with your leg? It's not my leg. I got a rupture. Why don't you ride with the transport? I asked. Why don't you go to the hospital? They won't let me. The lieutenant said I slipped the truss on purpose. Let me feel it. It's way out. Which side is it on? Here. I felt it. Cough, I said. I'm afraid it will make it bigger. It's twice as big as it was this morning. Sit down, I said. As soon as I get the papers on these wounded, I'll take you along the road and drop you with your medical officers. He'll say I did it on purpose. They can't do anything, I said. It's not a wound. You've had it before, haven't you? But I lost the truss. They'll send you to a hospital. Can't I stay here, Tenente? No, I haven't any papers for you. The driver came out of the door with the papers for the wounded in the car. 4 for 105, 2 for 132, he said. They were hospitals beyond the river. You drive, I said. I helped the soldier with the rupture up on the seat with us. You speak English? He asked. Sure. How you like this goddamn war? Rotten? I say it's rotten. Jesus Christ, I say it's rotten. Were you in the States? Sure, in Pittsburgh. I knew you was an American. Don't I talk Italian good enough? I knew you was an American, all right. Another American, said the driver in Italian, looking at the hernia man. Listen, Lieutenant, do you have to take me to that regiment? Yes. Because the captain doctor knew I had this rupture. I threw away the goddamn truss so it would get bad and I wouldn't have to go to the line again. I see. Couldn't you take me no place else? If it was closer to the front, I could take you to a first medical post. But back here you've got to have papers. If I go back, they'll make me get operated on, and then they'll put me in the line all the time. I thought it over. Yeah. You wouldn't want to go in the line all the time, would you? He asked. No. Jesus Christ, ain't this a goddamn war? Listen, I said. You get out and fall down by the road and get a bump on your head, and I'll pick you up on our way back and take you to a hospital. We'll stop by the road here, Aldo. We stopped at the side of the road. I helped him down. I'll be right here, Lieutenant, he said. So long, I said. We went on and passed the regiment about a mile ahead, then crossed the river, cloudy with snow water, and running fast through the spiles of the bridge, to ride along the road across the plain and deliver the wounded at the 2 hospitals. I drove coming back and went fast with the empty car to find the man from Pittsburgh. First we passed the regiment, hotter and slower than ever, then the stragglers. Then we saw a horse ambulance stop by the road. 2 men were lifting the hernia man to put him in. They had come back for him. He shook his head at me. His helmet was off, and his forehead was bleeding below the hairline. His nose was skinned, and there was dust on the bloody patch and dust in his hair. "Look at the bump, Lieutenant," he shouted. "Nothing to do. They come back for me." When I got back to the villa, it was 5 o'clock, and I went out where we washed the cars to take a shower. Then I made out my report in my room, sitting in my trousers and an undershirt in front of the open window. In 2 days the offensive was to start, and I would go with the cars to Plava. It was a long time since I had written to the States, and I knew I should write, but I had let it go so long that it was almost impossible to write now. There was nothing to write about. I sent a couple of Army Zona de Guerra postcards, crossing out everything except "I am well." That should handle them. Those postcards would be very fine in America, strange and mysterious. This was a strange and mysterious war zone, but I supposed it was quite well run and grim compared to other wars with the Austrians. The Austrian army was created to give Napoleon victories. Any Napoleon. I wished we had a Napoleon, but instead we had Il Generale Cadorna, fat and prosperous, and Vittorio Emanuele, the tiny man with the long, thin neck and the goat beard. Over on the right, they had the Duke of Aosta. Maybe he was too good-looking to be a great general, but he looked like a man. Lots of them would have liked him to be king. He looked like a king. He was the king's uncle and commanded the 3rd Army. We were in the 2nd Army. There were some British batteries up with the 3rd Army. I had met 2 gunners from that lot in Milan. They were very nice, and we had a big evening. They were big and shy and embarrassed and very appreciative together of anything that happened. I wish that I was with the British. It would have been much simpler. Still, I would probably have been killed. Not in this ambulance business. Yes, even in the ambulance business. British ambulance drivers were killed sometimes. Well, I knew I would not be killed. Not in this war. It did not have anything to do with me. It seemed no more dangerous to me myself than war in the movies. I wish to God it was over, though. Maybe it would finish this summer. Maybe the Austrians would crack. They had always cracked in other wars. What was the matter with this war? Everybody said the French were through. Rinaldi said that the French had mutinied and troops marched on Paris. I asked him what happened, and he said, "Oh, they stopped them." I wanted to go to Austria without war. I wanted to go to the Black Forest. I wanted to go to the Harz Mountains. Where were the Harz Mountains anyway? They were fighting in the Carpathians. I did not want to go there anyway. It might be good, though. I could go to Spain if there was no war. The sun was going down, and the day was cooling off. After supper, I would go and see Catherine Barclay. I wish she were here now. I wished I were in Milan with her. I would like to eat at the Cova and then walk down the Via Manzoni in the hot evening and cross over and turn off along the canal and go to the hotel with Catherine Barclay. Maybe she would. Maybe she would pretend that I was her boy that was killed, and we would go in the front door and the porter would take off his cap, and I would stop at the concierge's desk and ask for the key, and she would stand by the elevator, and then we would get in the elevator, and it would go up very slowly, clicking at all the floors, and then our floor, and the boy would open the door and stand there, and she would step out, and I would step out, and we would walk down the hall, and I would put the key in the door, and open it, and go in, and then take down the telephone, and ask them to send a bottle of Capri Bianca in a silver bucket full of ice, and you would hear the ice against the pail coming down the corridor. And the boy would knock, and I would say, "Leave it outside the door, please." Because we would not wear any clothes because it was so hot, and the window open, and the swallows flying over the roofs of the houses. And when it was dark afterward and you went to the window, very small bats hunting over the houses and close down over the trees, and we would drink the Capri and the door locked, and it hot, and only a sheet and the whole night, and we would both love each other all night in the hot night in Milan. That was how it ought to be. I would eat quickly and go and see Catherine Barclay. They talked too much at the mess, and I drank wine because tonight we were not all brothers unless I drank a little and talked with the priest about Archbishop Ireland, who was, it seemed, a noble man, and with whose injustice, the injustices he had received, and in which I participated as an American, and of which I had never heard, I feigned acquaintance. It would have been impolite not to have known something of them, when I had listened to such a splendid explanation of their causes, which were, after all, it seemed, misunderstandings. I thought he had a fine name, and he came from Minnesota, which made a lovely name. Ireland of Minnesota, Ireland of Wisconsin, Ireland of Michigan. What made it pretty was that it sounded like island. No, that wasn't it. There was more to it than that. Yes, Father. That is true, Father. Perhaps, Father. No, Father. Well, maybe yes, Father. You know more about it than I do, Father. The priest was good but dull. The officers were not good but dull. The king was good but dull. The wine was bad but not dull. It took the enamel off your teeth and left it on the roof of your mouth. And the priest was locked up, Roca said, because they found the 3% bonds on his person. It was in France, of course. Here they would never have arrested him. He denied all knowledge of the 5% bonds. This took place at Béziers. I was there and reading of it in the paper, went to the jail and asked to see the priest. It was quite evident he had stolen the bonds. I don't believe a word of this, Rinaldi said. Just as you like, Roca said. But I am telling it for our priest here. It is very informative. He is a priest. He will appreciate it. The priest smiled. Go on, he said. I am listening. Of course, some of the bonds were not accounted for, but the priest had all of the 3% bonds and several local obligations. I forget exactly what they were. So I went to the jail. Now this is the point of the story. And I stood outside his cell, and I said, as though I were going to confession, Bless me, Father, for you have sinned. There was great laughter from everybody. And what did he say? Asked the priest. Roca ignored this and went on to explain the joke to me. You see the point, don't you? It seemed it was a very funny joke, if you understood it properly. They poured me more wine, and I told the story about the English private soldier who was placed under the shower bath. Then the major told the story of the 11 Czechoslovaks and the Hungarian corporal. After some more wine, I told the story of the jockey who found the penny. The major said there was an Italian story, something like that about the duchess who could not sleep at night. At this point, the priest left, and I told the story about the traveling salesman who arrived at 5 o'clock in the morning at Marseille when the Mistral was blowing. The major said he had heard a report that I could drink. I denied this. He said it was true, and by the corpse of Bacchus we would test whether it was true or not. Not Bacchus, I said. Not Bacchus. Yes, Bacchus, he said. I should drink cup for cup and glass for glass with Bassi, Filippo Vincenza. Bassi said no, that was no test, because he had already drunk twice as much as I. I said that was a foul lie, and Bacchus or no Bacchus, Filippo Vincenza Bassi or Bassi Filippo Vicenza had never touched a drop all evening. And what was his name anyway? He said, was my name Federico Enrico or Enrico Federico? I said, let the best man win, Bacchus barred, and the major started us with red wine and mugs. Halfway through the wine, I did not want any more. I remembered where I was going. Bassi wins, I said. He's a better man than I am. I have to go. He does, really, said Rinaldi. He has a rendezvous. I know all about it. I have to go. Another night, said Bassi. Another night when you feel stronger. He slapped me on the shoulder. There were lighted candles on the table. All the officers were very happy. Good night, gentlemen, I said. Rinaldi went out with me. We stood outside the door on the patch, and he said, You'd better not go up there drunk. I'm not drunk, Rinnan, really. You better chew some coffee. Nonsense. I'll get some, baby. You walk up and down. He came back with a handful of roasted coffee beans. Chew those, baby, and God be with you. Bacchus, I said. I'll walk down with you. I'm perfectly all right. We walked along together through the town, and I chewed the coffee. At the gate of the driveway that led up to the British villa, Rinaldi said good night. Good night, I said. Why don't you come in? He shook his head. No, he said. I like the simpler pleasures. Thank you for the coffee beans. Nothing, baby, nothing. I started down the driveway. The outlines of the cypresses that lined it were sharp and clear. I looked back and saw Rinaldi standing watching me and waved to him. I sat in the reception hall of the villa, waiting for Catherine Barclay to come down. Someone was coming down the hallway. I stood up, but it was not Catherine. It was Miss Ferguson. Hello, she said. Catherine asked me to tell you she was sorry she couldn't see you this evening. I'm so sorry. I hope she's not ill. She's not awfully well. Will you tell her how sorry I am? Yes, I will. Do you think it would be any good to try and see her tomorrow? Yes, I do. Thank you very much, I said. Good night. I went out the door, and suddenly I felt lonely and empty. I had treated seeing Catherine very lightly. I had gotten somewhat drunk and had nearly forgotten to come, but when I could not see her there, I was feeling lonely and hollow. This concludes the second part of 16 total of A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway, produced by Best Audiobooks for free.